In the crystalline waters of the Marianas Research Station, Dr. Samira Patel pressed her face against the reinforced observation window, watching the strange lights dance in the abyss below. At nearly 7,000 meters beneath the surface, the pressure outside could crush a human body in seconds, but something was thriving down there, something that shouldn't exist. Recording log entry 47, October 15, 2157. The bioluminescent patterns have changed again, she spoke into her wrist recorder, her dark eyes tracking the movement below. They're no longer random. They're matching our dive team's search patterns from yesterday's expedition. The lights pulsed in perfect formation, recreating the precise sweep and return pattern that the research team's autonomous diving units had used. It wasn't the first time Samira had noticed this mimicry, but it was the most precise example yet. Commander James Rodriguez appeared beside her, his weathered face reflecting in the thick glass. Still convinced they're intelligent, he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. More than ever, Samira replied, not taking her eyes off the display. This isn't just pattern recognition anymore, James. They're learning. Adapting. The question is, why? The Marianas Research Station had been established to study deep-sea thermal vents, not to make first contact with an alien species. But 3 months ago, when the first unusual light patterns appeared, everything changed. What began as curious observations of seemingly random bioluminescence had evolved into something far more complex. Dr. Thompson wants to send out another dive team, James said, his voice carrying a note of concern. Says we need tissue samples if we're going to prove they're not just some new species of squid. Samira finally turned from the window, her expression hard. We both know they're not squid, James. No Earth species could learn this quickly. The way they've been watching us, studying us. They're not just mimicking our movements anymore. They're understanding them. Before James could respond, the station's lighting shifted to emergency red. A klaxon blared through the observation deck, and Chief Engineer Kai Nakamura's voice crackled over the intercom. All personnel to emergency stations. We've got multiple breaches in the outer research pod. Something's trying to get in. Samira rushed to the monitoring station, her fingers flying over the holographic display. The external cameras showed something she'd both hoped for and dreaded, dozens of bioluminescent forms pressed against the research pod's exterior, their lights pulsing in sync with the station's emergency beacons. They're not trying to get in, Samira whispered, realization dawning. They're trying to become us. The next 48 hours became a blur of activity. The creatures, dubbed mimics by the crew, continued their attempts to replicate every aspect of the station they could observe. They matched the rhythm of the emergency lights, the pattern of bubble releases from the oxygen recycling system, even the electromagnetic pulses from their communications array. But it was their attempt to reproduce the station's pressure equilibrium system that nearly proved catastrophic. The mimics began to generate their own pressure waves, creating a dangerous resonance that threatened to shatter the station's structural integrity. We need to shut down all external systems, Samira argued in the emergency meeting. They're learning from everything we do, but they don't understand the principles behind it. They're like children playing with matches, except these matches could kill us all. If we shut down, we lose our research capability, Dr. Thompson countered, his thin face flushed with anger. This is the greatest scientific discovery in human history, and you want to pull the plug? What I want, Samira said, her voice steady, is to prevent a disaster. They're intelligent, yes, but they don't think like we do. They're trying to become what they observe without understanding the consequences. If we don't stop now, they'll keep pushing until something breaks, either them or us. The debate raged on, but deep down, Samira knew they were running out of time. Through the observation window, she could see more mimics gathering in the darkness, their lights burning brighter, more insistent. They had created something unprecedented, a bridge between two entirely different forms of intelligence. But like any bridge built too quickly, without proper understanding of the forces involved, it was in danger of collapse. As she watched the creatures below continue their haunting imitation of human activity, Samira couldn't shake the feeling that they were approaching a point of no return. The mimics' desire to understand, to become, what they observed was both beautiful and terrifying. And somewhere in the darkness of the ocean's deepest trench, two species were about to learn the hard way that some gaps couldn't be bridged by imitation alone. The midnight shift at Marianas Research Station was usually quiet, but tonight the silence felt oppressive. Dr. Samira Patel sat alone in the dimmed control room, monitoring the feeds from their external sensors. The mimics had been quiet for the past 12 hours, too quiet. "They're planning something," she muttered to herself, checking the pressure readings for the 100th time. The creatures' previous attempts to replicate the station's systems had forced them to shut down all non-essential operations, leaving them running on minimal power. But rather than dispersing, the mimics had merely retreated into the darkness, their bioluminescent signatures still visible on the edge of their sensor range. A soft chime from her console broke the silence. New data from the seismic monitors showed unusual vibrations in the surrounding water, patterns that didn't match any known underwater phenomena. Samira leaned closer, her eyes widening as she recognized the frequency. "Station log, supplemental," she recorded, her voice tight with concern. "The mimics appear to be replicating our sonar mapping pulses, but they're doing it wrong. They've amplified the frequency to dangerous levels. If they continue..." A violent shudder ran through the station, cutting off her recording. Warning lights flashed across her console as the external pressure sensors spiked. She slapped the emergency comm button. "All hands, this is Dr. Patel. We have a situation." Commander Rodriguez was the first to arrive, still pulling on his uniform jacket. "What's happening?" "The mimics," Samira explained, bringing up the external camera feeds. "They're attempting to recreate our deep-sea mapping technology, but they're using their own bioluminescent energy to do it. The vibrations are interfering with the thermal vent stability." Through the observation windows, they could see hundreds of mimics now, their lights pulsing in coordinated waves that sent vibrations through the water. Each pulse grew stronger than the last, creating resonance patterns that threatened to destabilize the entire seafloor. Chief Engineer Kai appeared on the comm screen, his face grim. "The structural integrity field is holding, but these vibrations are stirring up the sediment around our foundation pillars. If they don't stop soon, we could lose our anchoring. We need to communicate with them somehow," Samira insisted, turning to James. "Make them understand they're putting themselves in danger too. How do you communicate with something that only knows how to copy?" Dr. Thompson's voice came from the doorway. He looked haggard, his previous scientific enthusiasm replaced by fear. "They don't understand our attempts at communication, they just mirror them." Samira's mind raced. "Then we need to show them, not tell them." She pulled up the station's external lighting controls. "If they learn by mimicry, let's give them something safe to mimic." Before anyone could object, she began programming a sequence of light patterns, simple, harmonic pulses that wouldn't interfere with the thermal vent stability. The station's external lights began to pulse, creating beautiful, flowing patterns in the dark water. For several tense minutes, nothing changed. The mimics continued their dangerous resonance pattern, the vibrations growing stronger. Then, slowly, a few of the creatures began to change their rhythm, matching the station's gentler pulses. "It's working," James whispered, watching as more mimics abandoned their previous pattern to join the new one. "They're switching to our frequency." But not all of them changed. A significant group maintained their original, dangerous pattern, creating a clash of energies in the water. The two competing rhythms began to generate interference patterns, sending shock waves through the surrounding area. "The thermal vent." Kai's voice crackled over the comm, "The vibrations are causing it to destabilize. We've got superheated water breaking through new fissures." Through the observation window, they watched in horror as jets of superheated water began bursting from the sea floor. The mimics scattered in confusion, their carefully coordinated patterns dissolving into chaos. Some continued to pulse with Samira's safer rhythm, while others intensified their dangerous resonance, creating a devastating cacophony of competing energies. "We need to evacuate the lower levels," James ordered, already moving toward the emergency controls. "Seal all pressure doors and prepare the escape pods for potential emergency deployment." Samira remained at her console, desperately trying to maintain the safe light pattern even as alarms blared around her. She watched as the mimics split into distinct groups, those following her pattern and those continuing their dangerous imitation. The division was creating something unprecedented, the first signs of individual choice among the collective. "They're not just copying anymore," she realized, speaking into her log recorder as chaos erupted around her. "They're choosing. Learning. Evolving. But at what cost?" As if in answer, another violent tremor shook the station. Through the windows, they could see the sea floor beginning to crack, releasing more jets of superheated water. The mimics' attempt to understand and replicate human technology had awakened something far more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. The question was no longer whether they could communicate with the mimics, it was whether both species would survive long enough to learn from their mistakes. As Samira watched the underwater chaos unfold, she couldn't help but wonder if their first contact with alien life would also be their last. The emergency klaxons had been screaming for hours, but Dr. Samira Patel barely heard them anymore. She stood in the station's reinforced command center, watching thermal imaging displays track the spreading disaster. The sea floor around the Marianas Research Station had become a nightmare of fractures and superheated vents, threatening both human and mimic alike. "Status report," Commander Rodriguez demanded, his voice hoarse from hours of issuing emergency orders. Chief Engineer Kai's hologram flickered as he responded, interference from the thermal disturbances affecting communications. "We've lost 3 of our 6 foundation anchors. The station's compensating, but we're seeing structural stress levels I've never encountered before." "And the mimics?" He hesitated. "They're still out there, still trying to copy our emergency protocols, but they're making everything worse." Samira studied the external feeds. The mimics had split into distinct groups, each seemingly pursuing different strategies. Some continued their dangerous resonance patterns, while others attempted to copy the station's emergency responses. A third group had begun exhibiting entirely new behaviors, creating complex light patterns unlike anything they'd seen before. "Look at this," she called out, enhancing one of the video feeds. "They're organizing. The ones following our safe patterns are trying to influence the others. They're not just learning our behaviors anymore, they're developing their own solutions." Dr. Thompson appeared on another screen, his face ashen. "The thermal readings from the new vents are off the scale. If those fissures widen any further, they could trigger an underwater avalanche. The entire trench wall could collapse." A violent tremor rocked the station, stronger than any before. Warning lights flashed across every console as new alarms joined the cacophony. Through the reinforced windows, they watched in horror as a massive crack appeared in the sea floor, releasing a towering plume of superheated water. "All hands, brace for impact." James shouted into the general comm. The pressure wave hit seconds later, sending equipment flying and forcing everyone to grab onto anything bolted down. When the shaking subsided, Samira pulled herself back to her station, ignoring the blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. What she saw on the monitors made her blood run cold. The mimics, they're changing. The creatures' bioluminescent patterns had shifted dramatically. Instead of their previous ordered formations, they now moved in rapid, erratic patterns. Some seemed to be growing larger, their lights burning brighter than ever before. "They're absorbing the thermal energy," she realized, her scientific mind racing to understand. "They're adapting to use it, but the process is unstable. They don't know how to control it." As if to prove her point, one of the larger mimics suddenly burst in a spectacular flash of light and energy, sending shock waves through the water. The explosion triggered a chain reaction among nearby mimics, each detonation adding to the chaos. "We need to evacuate," James declared, but Samira grabbed his arm. "Wait. Look at the surviving mimics, the ones that were following our safe patterns. They're trying to contain the energy releases. They're learning from each catastrophic failure, adapting in real time." Indeed, a group of mimics had formed a perimeter around their exploding brethren, using their own bioluminescence to create some kind of containment field. It was crude and unstable, but it showed clear signs of intentional coordination. "They're not just copying anymore," Samira breathed. "They're innovating. Creating their own solutions based on what they learned from us." Another violent tremor shook the station. Kai's voice crackled over the comm, panic evident in his tone. "We've lost containment in Section 7. The pressure door's failing. Seal off that entire deck," James ordered, but Samira interrupted. "No. The mimics near that section, they're trying to help. Look." She pointed to the external feeds, where several creatures had positioned themselves around the compromised section of the station. Their lights pulsed in a pattern that seemed to stabilize the surrounding water pressure. "They're trying to save us," she whispered. "They finally understand that their actions have consequences, and they're trying to fix their mistakes." But time was running out. The station's structural integrity was failing, the sea floor was becoming increasingly unstable, and the remaining violent mimics were still causing damage with their uncontrolled energy releases. As Samira watched the crisis unfold, she realized they had reached a crucial turning point. The mimics' rapid evolution from simple copycats to problem solvers had brought both species to the brink of disaster. Now, survival would depend on whether humans and mimics could move beyond imitation to true cooperation. Through the chaos of alarms and emergency reports, she began formulating a desperate plan. If some of the mimics could learn to help them, perhaps there was still hope. But first, she would have to convince both species to trust each other, a task that seemed almost impossible as another explosion rocked the depths of the Mariana Trench. The Marianas research station's backup generators hummed ominously as they struggled to maintain power. Dr. Samira Patel's fingers flew across the holographic interface, implementing her desperate plan. Time was running out, for both species. "What you're suggesting is insane," Commander Rodriguez said, watching as she programmed a complex sequence of energy pulses into the station's external systems. "We barely understand how these creatures work. Using our remaining power to communicate with them could kill us all." "We're dead anyway if we don't try," Samira countered, not looking up from her work. "The station's failing, the seafloor's becoming more unstable by the minute, and those rogue mimics are still causing chain reactions. This is our only chance." The external cameras showed the deteriorating situation. Dozens of mimics had already been lost to the energy overload, their attempts to handle the thermal radiation ending in brilliant explosions. The survivors had divided into clear factions, the aggressive ones continuing their dangerous energy absorption, and the others attempting to contain the damage. Chief Engineer Kai's voice crackled over the comm, "Whatever you're planning, do it fast. We've got multiple hull breaches on the lower levels, and the pressure seals won't hold much longer." Samira finished her calculations and turned to James. "I need station-wide power access. We have to show them how to properly channel the thermal energy they're absorbing. And if they just copy it wrong again?" Dr. Thompson interjected from his position at the environmental controls. "We've seen what happens when they misunderstand our technology." Another explosion rocked the station as if emphasizing his point. Through the reinforced windows, they watched another mimic detonate, its energy release sending shock waves through the water. "They're not just copying anymore," Samira insisted. "The ones that followed our safer patterns, they're learning, adapting. They want to help us, but they need to understand how." James studied her face for a long moment, then nodded grimly. Do it. We're out of options anyway. Samira activated her program. The station's external lights began pulsing in a complex pattern, synchronized with careful releases of thermal energy from their remaining functional vents. It was a demonstration of controlled energy management, a lesson in survival. For several tense minutes, nothing changed. The violent mimics continued their dangerous energy absorption, while the friendly ones maintained their defensive positions around the station. Then something extraordinary happened. One of the larger mimics approached the station, its bioluminescence dimming to match the exact frequency of their energy demonstration. It began to pulse in perfect sync with their pattern, but then did something unexpected. It modified the sequence, making it more efficient. They're not just learning the pattern, Samira breathed, watching in amazement. They're improving it. The cooperative mimics' display attracted others. One by one, they began to join the synchronized energy management effort. Their combined bioluminescence created a stunning light show in the dark waters, a dance of survival between two species. But not everyone was willing to join the collaboration. A group of the more aggressive mimics suddenly surged forward, their lights burning dangerously bright. They seemed to view the cooperation as a threat, responding with increasingly erratic energy pulses. Brace for impact! James shouted as one of the aggressive mimics collided with the station's outer hull. The impact sent tremors through the structure, causing already damaged systems to fail. Hull breach in Section 4. Kai reported. We're losing pressure control. Through the chaos, Samira noticed something remarkable. The cooperative mimics had formed a protective barrier between the station and their aggressive brethren. They were actively defending the humans, using their newly learned energy control to absorb and redirect the dangerous pulses. They're protecting us, she said, her voice filled with wonder. They understand we're trying to help them survive. But the situation was far from resolved. The violent faction of mimics grew more aggressive, their uncontrolled energy absorption reaching critical levels. The seafloor continued to fracture, releasing more superheated water into the environment. The station's structural integrity was failing, and even with the friendly mimics' help, they were running out of time. Samira watched as the two factions of mimics clashed in the dark waters, their light displays creating a spectacular but deadly battlefield. She had succeeded in establishing communication and cooperation with some of the creatures, but would it be enough to prevent the impending catastrophe? As emergency alerts continued to blare throughout the station, she realized that the next few minutes would determine not just their survival, but the future of human-alien relations. The question was, could both species overcome their differences in time to save themselves from destruction? The Marianas research station shuddered as another explosion lit up the abyss. Dr. Samira Patel knew they had minutes, perhaps seconds, before everything fell apart. The cooperative mimics were fighting a losing battle against their aggressive counterparts, while the station systems failed one by one. Primary power core at critical levels, Chief Engineer Kai reported, his hologram flickering wildly. We can't maintain the structural integrity field much longer. Through the observation window, Samira watched as the friendly mimics struggled to contain their violent brethren. Their defensive barrier was weakening, and the aggressive faction's energy signatures were becoming increasingly unstable. There's only one way to end this, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. We need to show them the ultimate consequence of uncontrolled energy absorption. Commander Rodriguez grabbed her arm as she moved toward the emergency dive suit storage. What are you planning? The station's automated systems aren't enough anymore. They need to see a human being demonstrate proper energy management. She pulled on the reinforced dive suit, her movements precise despite the station's constant shaking. I'm going out there. That's suicide, Dr. Thompson protested. The pressure at this depth. The suit can handle it for short periods, she interrupted. And the mimics who've been helping us will protect me. They understand now that we're trying to save them. Before anyone could stop her, Samira sealed her helmet and entered the emergency airlock. The station's computer began blaring warnings about external conditions, but she override them all. Starting airlock decompression, she announced over the comm, "If this doesn't work, it's been an honor." The outer airlock door opened, and Samira was immediately surrounded by the immense pressure of the deep ocean. Her suit's systems screamed warnings, but held steady. The friendly mimics noticed her presence immediately, their lights pulsing in what seemed like concern. Using her suit's external lights and energy regulators, Samira began demonstrating proper thermal energy management. She released controlled bursts of energy from her suit's vents, showing how to safely channel and disperse the dangerous power the mimics had been absorbing. The cooperative mimics watched intently, then began to mimic her actions, not blindly copying, but truly understanding the principles she demonstrated. They adjusted their own energy emissions, finding a perfect balance between absorption and release. But the aggressive faction wasn't ready to submit. Several of the violent mimics broke through the defensive barrier, charging directly at Samira. Their bodies pulsed with dangerous levels of absorbed energy, ready to detonate. In that moment, something unprecedented happened. The friendly mimics didn't just defend her, they communicated. Their lights flashed in complex patterns, trying to show their aggressive brethren the danger of their actions. It wasn't imitation anymore, it was genuine attempt at dialogue. One by one, the attacking mimics hesitated. They watched as Samira and the cooperative mimics worked together, demonstrating how to safely release the deadly energy they'd absorbed. Slowly, cautiously, they began to approach. "It's working," Samira breathed, her suit's oxygen levels dropping dangerously low. "They're finally understanding." The transformation spread like a wave through the violent faction. The mimics began releasing their stored energy in controlled bursts, following the pattern Samira had shown them. The seafloor's tremors began to subside as the thermal energy was properly dispersed. But the crisis wasn't over. Samira's suit was failing, and the station was still critically damaged. As her vision began to blur from oxygen deprivation, she felt herself being gently lifted by several mimics. They carried her back to the airlock, their lights pulsing in what could only be described as concern. Inside the station, emergency teams rushed to stabilize the remaining systems while Samira recovered in the medical bay. Through the observation windows, they watched in amazement as the mimics worked together to help repair the station's external damage, using their energy manipulation abilities to seal hull breaches and stabilize pressure differentials. "They're not just copying us anymore," Samira told James as they watched the creatures work. "They've learned to innovate, to solve problems on their own. We didn't just teach them, they taught us too." In the weeks that followed, the Marianas Research Station became something unprecedented, a true collaboration between humans and aliens. The mimics continued to learn and evolve, developing their own unique ways of communication while helping humanity understand the deep ocean environment they called home. The incident that nearly destroyed both species had instead forged an unbreakable bond. It proved that true understanding went beyond mere imitation, it required trust, sacrifice, and the willingness to learn from each other's mistakes. As Samira watched the mimics dance in the dark waters, their lights now a symphony of controlled, beautiful patterns, she realized that first contact had given humanity something precious, not just knowledge of alien life, but a lesson in the true meaning of communication and cooperation. The disaster that began with simple mimicry had ended in mutual understanding, forever changing how humanity would approach its future encounters with alien intelligence. In the depths of Earth's oceans, two species had learned that survival sometimes meant more than just copying what works, it meant working together to find new solutions.